Kalau begitu kita langsung masuk nih ke sesi berikutnya, yaitu untuk rekan-rekan game dev yang penasaran terkait proyek Moonshot ini seperti apa sih. Berikut akan ada penjelasan lebih detail lagi dari CMO dan CCO Agate kita, yaitu ada Pak Igor Tanzil. Pak Igor, kami persilakan.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nadia, for the introduction. Let's see. I need to share my screen. Yeah. How do I do that? Let's see. Share screen. There's a big button. All right. Okay. So again, I think I should start right with an apology. I'm going to present primarily in English, as my Indonesian isn't particularly good. And I'm more comfortable in English. So to that end, I apologize if I speak too quickly, or if there are any questions, feel free to type them in and we'll get to it. Okay, so I think what could be a good way to start here is to tell a bit more about myself. I think going into this, Arif asked to share a bit more about my experiences and why, when we did start talking about Skylab, this is something that I was absolutely interested in, and how we envision Skylab working in tandem with Agate's goals. So I'll start by, introducing myself. So hi, I'm Igor. I'm sure I've met some of you, if not most, in the dev side. And a little bit about myself beforehand. So I am primarily a creative guy. I started in film, went to New York to be an ad guy, wrote for a while there, and then ended up starting an enterprise startup before going back home to Indonesia, working in Batavian studio for a very interesting year, which I'll explain later. And then going on to start Critical Forge with my former bosses at Batavian, and then accidentally meeting Arif in KL and being dragged to Agate. Hi, Arif. So yeah, so that's me. I think I want to start with a couple of things, right? A few big questions, which are, what does games mean to me in general? I think I can sum it up to 3 different words: escapism, freedom, and joy. And to be honest, I didn't start playing video games or really getting into the whole nerd thing until quite late in life. Before, escapism for me was in the form of books and daydreaming and just closing my eyes and figuring things out in my head. But with video games, there was something visceral about it, right? I get to do something, see an immediate reaction to my actions, and I get to react from it. And that's amazing, right? Playing Red Alert for the first time is just life-changing, I think. And there's inherent joy with that. And I just like to hide myself in video games. A question that I didn't expect to ask of myself was, what does game development mean to me? And again, this goes back to, I guess, my background, right? I think, to Arif's point, and to many of the friends that we talked to as well, like growing up in Indonesia or around Indonesia, like game development wasn't an option, right? It wasn't even an idea in my head that I could make a video game. And so I chose to be a writer. I chose to be a film major. In hindsight, probably should have gone with the game thing. But what game development means to me is expression, right? We get to do so much more in our products than film, than radio, than TV. I know I've written for film, I've written for radio, and nothing quite gives that experience than making a video game or writing for a video game, right? We have a very unique challenge in that we're not just engaging on a visual level or an auditory level, we're engaging with people's actions. And we get to make a connection with our audiences. And that, I think, is just absolutely precious. So those are kind of like my big things about why I'm still in the game industry. And the key word there is going to be interesting going into this next section, which is my first 2 experiences in game development. And I started out in Batavian Studio as a marketing manager, as I shared before. We were working on a game called Grimods. Some of you may have seen it, and some of you may have seen it disappear very, very quickly in early 2016. I'm not going to get into the details, but you'll see why. And my second product was Forge of Blood, where I took on the role of creative director and kind of like the narrative designer for this as well. So let's start with kind of like the big picture experiences, right? Batavian Studio, I think when I first came back home from the US, was unique in Indonesia, right? It had funding. It had something that I hadn't seen in Indonesia, or something that I didn't think was possible in Indonesia. Right? Millions of dollars dedicated to a studio, a willingness from the studio heads to invest in it, massive budget, and a talent philosophy that I think was important to the growth of the studio, right? Buying the best and training the rest. And that's quite simple, right? One of the key things that we've identified early on is that the homegrown talent just isn't there. And what Batavian was able to do was to buy it, right? We had an animator from Quantic Dream. We had people like Pelix from Ubisoft. We could afford an art director who was fairly young, but incredibly talented straight out of school. And the talent sourcing there was also quite, I guess, in hindsight, it's simple. In practice, it took a lot more effort, but you could find Indonesian talent at cost from foreign schools, right? Foreign grads, and pulling them back to Indonesia to work on something that we wanted. Of course, it's not around anymore, the studio. It closed very abruptly in 2016. And basically, we all got the rug pulled from under us. It sucked, and it was very, very sad. But that's okay, right? Because we pick ourselves up and we move on, and we can start something new. I ended up working with Joe and Milo, who headed up the Batavian studio, to start another studio called Critical Forge. I think this is the project where I ended up meeting a lot of you guys here in the game dev scene, right? In stark contrast to Batavian is, well, we didn't have money, but we did have a clear vision of what we wanted to make. We also had a very clear list of the people we wanted to work with from the previous studio. And so talent philosophy was about the same. We cherry picked the best. And even if they were inexperienced, we knew that with a clear vision and some of the talent and the clear experience that we already had, people like Father, Pandu, and everything, we could push through our relative inexperience and kind of like the naivete that is associated with it. And talent sourcing, again, was personal circles and the previous studio. But after about 3.5 years, we released to not that great of a success. We closed down. Again, that sucked. But I wasn't sad. I was actually quite proud of what we've done, for reasons that I will share in the next section. So that was a bit of the braggy side of what I've done so far. But let's talk about the realistic side and the things that I learned from that entire process, right? In Batavian, I learned a very big lesson. Private non-game development investors suck ass. Like, it just sucks, holy shit. It was painful. But we could also see that the scale that we had, the money that we had, the project of that scale attracts talent. We could attract the talent that we wanted to. And the easiest way to keep that talent around is money. And with that, there was that realization that, anything can be built. You can build an industry, you can build a game company, you can build anything you want with money. But there's also that inescapable feeling and understanding that you really can't build what you don't know, you don't have. And that comes back to experience and knowledge and outside context. But I think the biggest lesson for me from Batavian was that one studio does not make an industry. Because I think within weeks of Batavian's closure, people left the country, right? They didn't leave the industry, they left the country. And that's the key distinction there, right? And this is something that Arif and Pahari have been talking about as well, right? The fact is, the industry just isn't set up to attract talent. There was basically a mass exodus from Indonesia to Malaysia for most of the talent from Batavian, Malaysia and the like. Indonesia is great if you want to start a company and if you've got the desire to lead and the desire to build something, but it's not great if you just want to work. Which then leads to kind of the things that I learned from Critical Forge. And I think this is something that, if Chris is here, this is something that you'll probably harp on a lot about, right? Don't skip on marketing. Doesn't matter how great your game is. If you can't market it well, you end up where I am, and you close down your studio. But in that same vein, scale attracts talent, right? Even without the marketing, even without the budget. If you're working on something big, something with a clear vision, something that quite honestly is interesting, they can keep talent around. And without money, you got to turn to other sources to keep that talent around, right? And that's a shared vision. We were very clear going into that studio with what we wanted to build, how we wanted to build it, and who we wanted to build it with. And throughout that process, again, I've kind of learned that, yeah, you can build anything you want. You can build what you don't have. It's just without money, you kind of do it with time, with a bit more effort. a few mistakes, a lot more mistakes, more time until you're left asking why. And then, but you still do it. And then you come out of it with the realization that you just don't know anything, and that you're lost, and it sucks to be alone. And I'd like to end with, one studio does not change an industry, right? No one studio here can change our industry together. We have to do it together, which leads to my next section, kind of like the hard truths of what we have to recognize in our own industry. The fact is, if Larian comes calling, your lead programmer or Bandhu would go, right? None of us here lack, or I mean, none of us here have the pull to keep foreign graduates or people with that sort of talent that can work out there just at home. We just don't. And the homegrown talent that we do have, we lack contextual skills or contextual standards, right? We know what to build. We know we need to build 3D pipelines, project management pipelines, but we don't know how the big guys do it. We don't know how to do it properly. There's plus and minuses to that, right? Because not knowing means you get to make fun mistakes. You get to make cool things potentially, but at the end of the day, that is a limiter. The big one as well is, I think we've seen a lot of small scale successes in this industry, just as we've seen it in Malaysia and Vietnam and everything. But what that does to an industry is that it opens up ourselves for foreign intrusion and consolidation. And I'm sure most of you are already thinking, well, that's great, right? We want EA, we want Gameloft, and we want those people to come and hire us and give us money. But the thing is, without context, we can't set our price. And I can tell you right now, I think we're worth a hell of a lot more than what those guys are willing to pay us. Having been through some other experiences that I won't share in this forum. And also, I think what we need to recognize that right now, there just isn't a lot of incentive for us to work together, right? You have your own goals, we have our own goals. And we want your money, I want your money, etc. But the fact is, none of us can go it alone. And I think that's where initiatives like Skylab come in, right? Because at the end of the day, it is better together, right? And one thing we do have to recognize is that our industry isn't a zero-sum game, right? There's indies, AAA sectors, et cetera. We can play in our own sectors. But what is interesting and what is important is that our industry is strong, and all of these little sectors are defensible. I think we have an amazing indie market, and that's already very defensible. But that leaves everything else up for intrusion and invasion, right? If we're only indie as an industry, then foreign companies can come in, take those talent, and utilize that talent towards their own means. And we need someone, or we need other companies to start shooting for the big things, right? And we've seen it on a smaller scale here and there every now and then, but there just isn't enough staying power for us to have a really defensible position in the market. But the one thing that we can say we do have is that, having met all of you guys every year or so in every random event, right, is that at the end of the day, our industry is just a massive collaborative space that we can all work together in. And that leads us to Skylab, right, and the goals of it, and our internal goals in Agate as well. So our moonshot, and kind of like our big bet for the future in Agate, is the pursuit of the emergent collaborative space. What is it? Well, let's break it down to its core component parts, right? Emergent gameplay. It's game mechanics or gameplay situations that come from the set rules in a video game that we set, right? And a collaborative space is really just a space in which players or us are motivated to cooperate. I was asked to include an example, and I think the best example of emergent gameplay that I could think of in recent years is from The Division, kind of going to the dark zone for the first time, playing within the context of those rules, running into a bunch of random Finns who barely spoke any English, and somehow through the text tools, the communication tools, and the emotes at play, we could communicate and end up working together for a few good hours where we killed people, worked together. It was interesting. And that sort of cooperation and that sort of feeling is amazing. And that's something that we want to kind of build towards. And so for Agate specifically, right, we want to talk about our decision process. What we look for in kind of deciding what our moonshot project should be is financial potential, obviously, performance potential, and alignment with our company vision, ethics, and compass. We can kind of bring that down into a simple equation, right? A being what we want to do, and what are the core measures that we want to put in. For the emerging collaborative space, it's basically multiplayer scalability as our core financial potential there, right? I think single player games, while there is a market, there's always a market for anything. Scalability comes from multiple people playing, and the inherent emergent gameplay that comes from the input of so many new players. And then there's also performance potential, right? The unexploited niche, which for us comes down to PvE versus PvP. I think the PvP market is saturated. And overall, from a company level, right, I think we like the idea of a net positive gameplay philosophy where we believe in win-wins, right? You can win more than other people. You can win a lot more. But as long as everybody wins something, there are no hard feelings. There is no sadness. And that's always good. So taking that and removing competition. And for us, that means the emergent collaborative space. I'd be happy to answer more questions, I think, in the Q&A, or if you guys have anything, feel free to just jump in and start putting in the text. Right. So that also leads, I guess, to the three big questions that I think a few of you guys are going to be asking. So where are the funds coming from? As Arif had shared as well, it's from Untitled War Chest, right? And we are open to expansion as we go. Why multiplayer? Well, I think the big challenge for a lot of us is efficient synchronous multiplayer. In terms of complexity, it's massive. And with our current manpower, we're still struggling with it. And so we'd like to open that up to new insights and new input. And of course, why collaborative instead of competitive, right? I think in the last, year and a half, we've seen traction for the PvE co-op gameplay, right? Anything from a few years back, the Left 4 Dead series, now there's, just this year, there's a lot of, anything from top-down shooters to first-person shooters, third-person shooters, they're all in that collaborative space. And the fact is, I think people are realizing the PvP market itself is already too complex and too entrenched for change, that let's play with the PvE stuff. And from a design standpoint, I think competitive multiplayer design is inherently more complex than I want to deal with. And I think that's quite the same for a lot of you as well. And the complexity doesn't scale linearly. It's just, it's crazy, at least from my very, very layman's point of view. And that's why we want to avoid it. And so let's talk about the core offerings that Arif had brought up earlier, right, in Skylab: funding, mentorship, network, and unity. I think funding is the big one, money. There's not a lot else to say. We'll fund it from 100K up to $1 million. Like Arif said, the concern isn't whether or not whether or not the money will run out. It's whether or not there are people that can take it and grow with it. Because as Bahari had shown as well, our market is small, right? We have, 80, 90 people here. That's a big chunk of our local industry already. And a lot of the people here are founders. And so you guys represent an even larger chunk of that industry. And that's the problem, right? Mentorship. And I think this is some of the things that people had talked about as well. And is that what I found amazing at Agate is that when I came in here, I met Chipto and I met Chris and I met those guys. And basically Agate has spent the last decade building up a roster of people who have been in similar situations like me. We started a studio, we tried it, we gave it our best shot, and either outright bought them, hired them. And so what you have is a brain trust of very, very senior and very, very experienced people that can share our mistakes, because at the end of the day, the best thing we can teach and best thing we can learn from are the mistakes that we've made. And of course, support, right? Agate, I share this often too when I talk to people who are like, oh, you're making a game, that's awesome. What's it like being in India? And I say it sucks, because you don't have support. You don't have corporate infrastructure. You don't have HR. You don't have tech infrastructures to help you, and you have to figure everything out yourself. And I think with Agate's support, we can help build that for our friends and for people who do join us in Skylab. And finally, I think the network, right? When I first started speaking, right, I said, I know most of you people here, but knowing you guys really comes down to, a few short conversations and in a game event or two, or in, a session like this. There isn't a lot of chances to actually work together with you and to share and to combine the knowledge of everything we've learned. And I think with Skylab, having broken down some of those barriers, we have a real opportunity to collaborate on a much deeper level than, oh, yeah, I have this cool idea and great, you want to bring the money? Right? That's going to be the next big question. And finally, I think the big part about what made or makes Agate work as a whole is the internal structure of willingness and the need to share with one another, knowledge, experiences, and everything. And with Skylab, we're able to open that up to the industry that wants to work with us. And that's very, very important. And finally, unity, right? I think in pursuing the emergent collaborative space with Agate, we don't just harness Agate's manpower, we harness your manpower, your ideas, your companies, your teams, and we get to work together and build the building blocks we need to have that Moonshot project. The idea of collaborative building blocks, where we're all building component parts of a greater sum that can eventually build that massive product or that dream product, is ideal. Because we didn't get to space, well, when I say we, the US didn't get to space by just hiring out one company and say, this is the rocket. No, they pitched a few hundred different companies. JPL had to work with Boeing and et cetera. And all of that came together into one massive effort. And so what is Agate looking for? I'm sure this is going to be the big question that you're all asking us next, right? As Arif said as well, there is no real limit, right? As long as it kind of falls in line with what we envision as a Moonshot project, we're open to it. Multiplayer tech, apps, plugins, anything that can help that tech side. Gameplay ideas, right? There's a lot out there. Co-op PvE is on the rise. If you have any other cool ideas for non-zero sum gameplay, we're open to it. Powerful IPs, right? I think it's a lot harder to take an existing IP, let's say Warhammer, and say, okay, let's, how do we do a co-op component? Okay, great. In what era, what sector, what sort of gameplay, right? Those are questions that need to be asked of IPs. And when you're working with big ticket IPs, there's a lot of rules, a lot of issues to deal with. But if you have an IP that's new and built from the ground up for cooperative play, that could be interesting, and we'd love to hear it. And I think the big one is your perspective. Yes, we have our Moonshot goal and what we think is the future of video games, or our future anyway. But if you have a new thought, something different, a challenge, we'd love to hear it. That's the whole point of this, is having you guys share your ideas and kind of having that willingness to work together. It's going to be awesome. And I'd like to end with, I guess, with Skylab, right? What's changed or what hasn't changed? I think, as Arif and Pahadi has shown, our commitment to industry building remains the same. We still have these core components, and for game developers up and down the scale, there's a lot of these things that you can they can explore and try out for before going on to Skylab. But what's new? And again, this goes back to the start of my little spiel, is that I think Skylab is unique in that it's a fund made by game devs and run by game devs, and not just people who are looking for a quick buck, or people who go in and ask you to do unreasonable things because that's the budget and that's the goal. Skylab is also unique because we have a singular focus. We're not spreading the money just out there. We're building towards something together. And I think the big part of that is also how involved the Agate leadership will be. I've had the good pleasure, I guess, of dealing with Arif a lot more this past couple of years since being in Agate, and it's eye-opening, right? And that sort of mentorship is going to be key in kind of growing some of our friends in the industry. And I'd like to end with the biggest thing that Skylab needs, and that's you guys, right? We can't do this without you. So we'd love to hear your ideas, and we'd love to hear what you have in mind. And we can go from there. So if you're ready to go, I think signing up is easy. It's going to that website. The hard part will be building your pitch, showing us your demo. And from there, we can open it up to the Q&A session. So back to you, Nadia.
Alright, thank you so much Pak Igor for the presentation. Buat semoga tadi apa yang sudah dipresentasikan oleh Pak Igor tadi bisa memberikan konteks lebih ya mengenai proyek Moonshot ini. Oke, kalau gitu dan juga untuk rekan-rekan game dev nih yang mungkin masih memiliki pertanyaan, berikutnya jangan khawatir karena kita akan langsung masuk nih ke sesi Q&A dengan Pak Arif dan juga Pak Igor. Dan juga untuk yang ingin mengajukan pertanyaan nih, mungkin ataupun tadi yang sudah sempat bertanya tapi belum sempat terjawab, itu bisa langsung mengajukan pertanyaan dengan cara raise hand. di reactions yang paling bawah kalau saya belum tahu. Ntar yang udah resign bakalan aku tunjuk untuk menyampaikan pertanyaannya. Dan jangan lupa juga saat menyampaikan pertanyaan untuk menyebutkan dulu nama dan juga memperkenalkan diri sebelum mengajukan pertanyaannya. Seperti itu. Oke, udah ada Kak Adam? Kak Adam, silahkan.
Halo, selamat siang teman-teman semua. Hai Arif, hai Igor, hai Nadia.
Halo.
Oke, siap.
Halo.
Pertanyaannya ini, kita maksudnya tadi secara vision ini kan project Moonshot ya. Kita pengen industri game kita bisa naik ke tier yang atas gitu kan. Sedangkan tadi the fact bahwasannya fakta game dev kita masih tier-tier bawah gitu kan. Do you guys prefer project that very big, yang aiming like maybe skipping like 2-3 level from the current state? Misalkan contoh Arsenesia sekarang level 6 gitu kan. Kalian prefer cobain dong kalian take risk yang gede ambil ke project level 2 gitu kan, tier 2, atau kalian prefer kayak step by step gitu. Oke, sekarang Arsenesia di level 6 gitu kan. Oke, kalian coba taruh project yang mungkin di 200 dulu, 300 dulu gitu. Jadi sebenarnya apa ya, sebesar apa risk yang pengen dicari di Skylab ini?
You want to take this one, Riff, or?
You first, I think,
Okay.
for this one.
Adam, I think that's a very good question. Yeah, I'll answer the English way. I think what level of risk? I think risk is a relative thing. I think what matters, like Arif had said before, is your capability, right? If you say, okay, I want to do something that is going to be massive, I don't really know how to do it. Not sure if I have the manpower to do it, then the answer is absolutely not. But if you can fill in those blanks where I think I know how to do it roughly, I think these are the people that I need. I need a way to get these people. These are the things I have to learn. And these are the list of products or steps that I have to take to achieve that. And if those steps make sense, yeah, I think that makes sense for Skylab. What do you think, Arif?
Yeah, probably totally agree with that. Nambahin sih, kebalikan sama Igor, saya pakai bahasa Indonesia lebih mampu. Sama tadi ya, jadi benar, jadi kita lebih prefer teman-teman ambil yang justru yang leaping, karena kalau kita cuma growing organically tadi, kita cuma jadi tier 3 by the next 10 years. Kita invest umur lagi nih, for the next 10 years invest umur, dan jadinya gitu-gitu aja. Jadi ya, komparatif sama tech industry tadi ya, ke komparasi kita, I believe like the talent in game dev ini super bright talent. Compared to we invest our time with the tech, the scale of impact kalau kita nggak aim big itu jadi jauh komparatif. Makanya kita pengen dengan harapannya ada Skylab Fund ini bisa jadi safety net buat teman-teman untuk mimpinya jadi besar. Karena kalau nggak sebelumnya kan ngeri ya, misalnya for teman-teman yang mungkin masih coba balance antara B2B project, karena kita melakukan itu sih, kita doing B2B and then dapat profit nih, kita tabung profitnya bikin game, gagal, yaudah nabung lagi B2B, boleh, tapi the scale of dream nggak akan pernah jauh. Kita cuma paling sekarang kita di X plus 1. Nggak pernah kayak sekarang skala kita X, gue mau 10X. Nggak kebayang. Nah, justru harapannya dengan adanya Skylab Fund ini, teman-teman mulai mikir, at least try to dream bigger. Hopefully tadi ketemu jawabannya, kita bisa langsung collaborate.
Oke, thank you.
Oke, kalau gitu kita lanjut ke pertanyaan selanjutnya, ada dari Aji Genome Studio. Can you explain more about merger and acquisition that Mr. Igor mentioned in Skylab funding? Boleh dari Kak Igor atau Kak Arif?
Arif aja ini, silakan.
Oke.
Yeah, thank you. Jadi the way the fund is deployed itu technicalities-nya ada banyak macam-macam ya. Let's say, for example, company X try to pitch. Karena ada banyak aspek juga yang diperhitungin, karena yang pitching itu belum tentu punya company juga. Jadi there's a lot of legal stuff there, finance, tech stuff yang matters lah. Let's say, to simplify, ada company X. They want to pitch a game idea. Let's say A Wonderful World, that's the title. They pitch untuk 200K funding. Dan obrolannya dimulai kan. Nanti kita kalau secara stage of funding itu kita bisa explore multiple stage of funding ya. Bisa aja the 200K directly goes to the project. So we do a co-development partnership. Nanti kemungkinan negosiasinya bakal lebih banyak dari sisi kepemilikan hak cipta dari produknya. Kami dari Agate pasti karena kita put the fund, kita mau minta bagian dari kepemilikan IP-nya. Biasanya sih kita selalu kejar untuk aim 50-50 ownership. Itu tahap pertama ya, kita invest di level project. Tahap kedua adalah, ternyata ada company X ngerasa bahwa, this 200K is not only in one product, tapi kita mungkin bakal spin off 7 product. Dan ini tuh agak nggak beda-beda nih produknya misalnya ya. Dan mungkin at the time, the best case adalah kita invest in the company. 200K for di trade sama equity di company-nya. Jadi company cetak saham baru, kita put sebagai setoran modal, sehingga modalnya bisa dipakai. Yang ketiga adalah strategic action, which is merger and acquisition. Most of the case biasanya kita ngobrol sama company, terus company ngerasa bahwa the founder, for example, dia bilang bahwa I really want to build, this is my dream game, and I don't want to ngurus, dia nggak mau lagi ngurus finance staff, HR staff, karena dia ngerasa it's distracting, dia punya waktu untuk benar-benar bikin game yang dia paling impikan. Kalau kayak gitu malah bisa jadi negosiasinya malah ujung-ujungnya ke M&A, di mana kami posisinya sebagai Agate, kita M&A aja di merge company-nya, fundingnya untuk proyeknya ada, dan mereka udah nggak perlu lagi mikirin HR, finance, pokoknya tiap bulan duit ada, gajian masuk aja. Jadi it really depends on its negotiation. Tapi kira-kira ada stages itu sih. Jadi kita berusaha se-fleksibel mungkin, karena tadi kan tujuannya ini adalah proyek kolaborasi bersama, kita nggak pengen limit, kita cuma pengen kita grow bareng, lebih ke situ.
Oke, semoga menjawab ya dari Mas Aji. Oke, kalau gitu ada lagi kah yang mau bertanya? Yang mau bertanya bisa langsung raise hand ataupun bisa bertanya lewat kolom chat juga, seperti itu. Oke, ada dari Steph Dream Studio, apakah genre game yang diutamakan itu lebih ke multiplayer? Dari Kak Igor, dari Karif.
Sure. I think, yes. For now, I think that's exactly what we're looking for. If you can make a compelling case for a single player game that can somehow fill in the emerging collaborative space target, absolutely open to hearing it, because that's an interesting thought. But yeah, right now we're focused on multiplayer technologies, particularly co-op. Yeah.
Oke, ada tambahan dari Karif?
Nambahin dikit, probably mungkin kayak full single player, it will be very hard in the collaborative space sih, seperti Igor bilang. But maybe we could check the latest Supercell games ever built, that is the name. It's basically kind of single player, tapi it's a very collaborative. That's the thesis that we want to build, and now they already launched it. Kita telat. Super telat. but that's the power of the thesis ya. Once we believe on the thesis, once we believe there's a market, there actually bakal ada someone yang bakal ngelakuin sih. Yang kita pengen adalah Indonesia as a Indonesian game industry, hopefully kita bisa collect kita punya resources untuk go to satu direction dulu. Karena kalau kita yang resourcesnya aja udah mencar-mencar dan kecil, dan kita kemana-mana, udah pasti nggak jadi apa-apa. Kayak it's logically, maksudnya nggak jadi apa-apa. Kayak skalanya tadi bottom of the pyramid punya skill, kan sedih ya. Setiap kali ketemu sama orang Igor yang sering ketemu orang US, dibilang, oh di Indonesia ada game industry, oh pantas kalian off the map. Masuk.
Yeah.
Oke, thank you. Nah, ada lagi pertanyaan dari Riyadi Salim, yaitu apakah ada preferensi genre game related to collaborative multiplayer seperti RPG, FPS, or etc. supaya lebih gampang difunding oleh Skylab? Prefer kalau ada example game seperti apa yang ditarget Skylab biar lebih tahu scalingnya. Seperti apa?
Okay, I guess I can start with ini for now kita masih cukup open. I think we're still in the process of validating our own hypotheses right now, right? But I think the big part of it is we believe in the vision, and we want to take a leap for that. And whether or not that vision takes form in the shape of an FPS or an RPG or a top-down shooter, we have yet to solidify that. So we're open to ideas. Right now, we have a very loose thesis that we'd like to share with you guys. And if you want to be a part of it, we can't wait to hear your ideas.
Oke, dari Karif ada yang mau ditambahkan lagi?
Totally agree sih. Mungkin lebih kayak hint kali ya. Probably teman-teman bisa start, the thesis is there. Mungkin teman-teman tinggal connectin sama your bottom up capability. Teman-teman strength-nya di mana sih? If you guys strength-nya adalah gue tiap hari main game FPS, gue udah coba bikin prototype game FPS, then do FPS. Tapi kalau tiap hari teman mainnya RPG sampai 500 hour, then do RPG. So mix it with the strength.
Oke, itu depends on personalnya ya berarti. Oke. Nah, terus ada pertanyaan lanjutan dari Kak Adam, yaitu ketika mengajukan proposal, di proposal juga termasuk untuk budget marketing atau cuma produksinya saja?
Gue jawab ya. Ideally at this stage of fund, kita bakal butuh a collective proposal, di mana nggak cuma budgetnya berapa, kita juga mau tahu budgetnya berapa, marketing budgetnya berapa, potensi revenue berapa. Karena kita juga pengen lihat apakah the team already have a solid product manager ya. Jadi the one that able to manage the project, business plan-nya end to end. Jadi bahkan nggak sampai marketing pasti iya, plus projection bahkan. Projection itu pasti bakal challenge the conservative projection, the aggressive projection, what's the assumption, how do you find the assumption, those are the question pasti bakal tanyain.
Oke, semoga menjawab Kak Adam. Oke, kalau gitu adakah yang mau bertanya lagi sebelum kita tutup sesi Q&A-nya? Kalau ada yang mau bertanya bisa langsung raise hand aja, supaya bisa langsung mengajukan pertanyaannya. Oke, sepertinya sudah tidak ada ya.
Kalau
Oke
nggak
deh,
ada mungkin saya mau nanya kali kalau boleh ke
oh
teman-teman.
boleh,
Ya.
silakan Kak.
Jadi ya mungkin ini sesinya juga udah mungkin masih ada beberapa teman-teman media, tapi hopefully ini jadi lebih sesi untuk dimana kita bertukar pikiran sih. Karena tadi balik lagi di Skylab initiative, it's more like a collaborative initiative yang kita pengen bangun untuk mempercepat kita ada perusahaan Indonesia atau industri Indonesia bisa mencapai bulan ya tadi si Tayerwan. Mungkin pengen tahu general feedback sih. What do you think about the? Let me rephrase the question. Mikir bentar ya. Lagi mikir. Ya mungkin generally, apakah teman-teman ada general feedback dulu kali ya? It's a very open-ended question. What do you think about this initiative? Whether this is the right timing or this is the right needs for us? Because kita kan see the ecosystem pipeline ya, karena kita juga lihat bahwa on scale of up to 50K, up to 15K, up to 50, up to 150 udah ada yang mainin. And then from what our experience juga, even this scale of funding, they have a deal flow issue. Deal flow itu istilahnya kayak yang pitch juga kurang, bener ya? Mungkin Nadia juga ngalamin gitu. Jadi the fund is there, kita bisa scale the fund, tapi yang pitch nggak ada. Saya juga nggak tahu sih. Mungkin butuh general feedback mungkin dari teman-teman di sini sesama founder di game industry. What do you think about the Skylab? Just want to hear feedback. Maybe Adam or di sini
Yang pengen
ada.
beropini bisa silakan open mic, silakan. Oke, Kak Adam silakan.
Oke, nanti teman-teman tambahin ya. Tadi karena pada ngechat, gue jadi ikut ngechat. Kalau menurut gue ya, Rif dan teman-teman di Agate, di Indonesia kan yang bikin game multiplayer belum banyak nih. Gue nggak tahu kenapa ya, apa mungkin karena spiritnya lebih banyak spirit yang pengen deliver game-game single player dan lain sebagainya gitu. Jadi poin pertama itu. Terus poin kedua, ini kan kesannya berada di tier yang tinggi ya, berarti yang udah butuh dana yang udah lebih dari 100.000, berarti anggapannya ini udah di atasnya IKSI, udah di atasnya BIP, udah di atasnya studi-studi yang di atas itu. Nah, kalau dari sepenglihatan gitu ya, yang di atas itu aja kan sedikit, yang mau ke multiplayer juga lebih sedikit lagi gitu kan. Nah, itu ketika project Skylab ini ngincer yang di atas-atas dan multiplayer, itu apa nggak membuat tadi itu ya kemungkinan yang daftarnya sedikit?
Malah ditanya balik. Jadi ini we just try to we just want to try sih, dan jadi kayak I talk with Igor also, I talk with some of our venture capital kan. In the last discussion when we pitched about the Indonesian game fund idea, I talk to some people and then give the macro data. Everybody, oh I want to chip in. And then like in instant like few months, the money is there already, like very big money. And after that mereka mulai nanya, how's the deal flow? Di situ gue langsung khawatir, there's no deal flow.
Deal flow.
Oh jadi gini, if for example like the Indonesian Game Fund itu kita berhasil raise 200 miliar, 200 miliar rupiah gitu kan. Ya, biasanya kalau fund itu ada umurnya kan. Kita misalnya umur 5 tahun nih. Jadi within 200 miliar itu kita udah harus invest in the first 3 years. Udah diinvest nih 200 miliar. Dan hopefully kita bisa harvest di tahun ke-7 atau ke-8. Nah kan, nah artinya untuk bisa seperti itu biasanya kan fund juga nggak akan mau invest di banyak company kan, pasti maksimal di 10 sampai 15 atau 20 lah maksimal. And then let's say tadi berapa sih 200 miliar bagi 20 company masing-masing dapat 100 miliar, dapat 200 miliar dapat 10 miliar. Nah 10 miliar ini pertanyaan adalah ada nggak sih 20 company yang bisa terima 10 miliar it's Indonesian company dan bisa scale? Itu it's a big question mark yang kita takutnya nggak ada. Nah, this Skylab Fund is a prototype thesis. Kalau ini ada, we want to scale the fund. Kalau ini nggak ada, we want to see what is the problem. Problemnya bisa di-solve cepat atau enggak. Itu masalah sih. If enggak, bisa jadi mungkin the next big strategi adalah how to scale it faster. Probably kita bikin exodus besar-besaran dari game dev luar ke Indo, misalnya. Not sure what is the strategy. Kalau jadi after 1 year ya, after this, kalau misalnya the fund is there, but the deal flow is not there, we need another approach lah. probably kemungkinan tarik exodus brain drain besar-besaran justru talent luar kita tarik ke sini.
Kalau ngelihat kan pertanyaannya apakah ada ya yang bisa menampung gitu ya. Sepertinya kalau misalnya tanpa multiplayer, ini bukan gua against multiplayer ya, gua kan juga ngebayangin game multiplayer gitu kan. Kalau tanpa multiplayer itu kan bisa lebih banyak nih yang bisa menerima Moonshot itu, nggak harus jadi multiplayer game gitu kan. Itu how do you think about that? I mean it's a potential kan, kayak ada para kacuk, Kitaria Fable, Potion Permit, itu kan game-game potensial gitu kan. Ada Coral Island yang mereka juga punya potensi dan ada di skala itu. Nah itu kira-kira elemen multiplayer-nya justifikasinya apa sih kenapa pengen banget multiplayer?
Oh, thank you Adam. Gor nih tolong tambahin ya. Justru that's a good question. Justru malah kita merasa multiplayer bisa kita yang tambahin. That's why it's a co-development kan. Let's say even like Coral Island, kalau mereka sih udah bakal bikin collaborative play multiplayer kan. Let's say tadi kita lihat Fables lah misalnya, and then they want to make a sequel, and then di sequelnya bisa main bareng. It's an element, it's a technology, kita udah ada teknologinya, kita pakai. Yang penting mimpinya dulu kan, mimpi dan visibility comes with it. Jadi
itu jadi lebih make sense sih, karena tadinya di bayangan gue ketika lu ngomong multiplayer, di bayangan kan kayak Among Us, kemudian Mobile Legends gitu-gitu kan. Padahal yang maksudnya kayak Stardew Valley pun juga ada fitur multiplayernya dan itu pun maksudnya masih masuk ya. Oke, kalau gitu sebenarnya lebih.
Ya, dan tadi mungkin Igor juga udah mention, we specifically targetin malah multiplayer yang co-op dan PvE instead of PvP.
Okay.
Mungkin I can also add on to that. Yeah, I think kayak bilang kan, kalau emang game single player, but if you can make a very clear argument for where it can be in terms of multiplayer space, right? That shows your ability to take what you have and see the road ahead, and that's at the end of the day what we're looking for, right? Gua ada ide ini, by adding X and Y, we now have a multiplayer game. And then these are the skill sets that we need, because I think targeting multiplayer segment specifically is that last big barrier in terms of the game design capability of this country, right? Everyone in this room from the dev side has designed a single player game. How many of us have designed a multiplayer game to success? Very few, right? Because the complexity is, like I said, it's not linear and it's very exponential, especially when kita fokusnya PvE dulu lah, tahu diri juga. Because the PvP multiplayer side at that point is you can't account for great, a little bit of imbalance here and there is okay, because that makes it fun. But the moment you say that on a PvP side, you're screwed, right? Yeah.
Clear. Kalau gitu pasti positioningnya kalau bisa kayak gitu. Noted. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you loh Adam for raising the question. Jadi kita know how to better communicate.
Alright, semoga menjawab Kak Adam. Kalau gitu ada next question dari Dio Trisatyaloka. Tadi kalau tidak salah ada co-develop ya. What's the scope? Kalau misal tim kami kekurangan talent or power di satu bidang, say we like in art or technical or DevOps, apakah bakal dibantu untuk ngedevelop atau sebatas mentoring aja? Atau diserahkan ke studio masing-masing untuk cari new talents and expand their own studio instead? Thanks. Mau dari siapa nih? Kak Igor atau Kak Arif?
Bagi tugasnya gini, kalau pertanyaan bahasa Indonesia, kalau bahasa Inggris lu. Nggak, bercanda. Mau dari gua dulu, Gor? Oke. Jadi, co-development means kita develop together, partially kita juga bisa masukin fund. Nanti pasti it really depends case by case basis. Misalnya teman-teman tadi clear sekali bilang bahwa, contoh tadi Adam yang ada bawah deh, teman-teman udah punya capability proven bikin single player game yang popular dan teman-teman mau scale. Teman bilang bahwa my single player games waktu kemarin di launch the sales is 50,000. Teman-teman pengen scale jadi 250,000, 5 times kan scale-nya. Dan teman udah riset the market, teman bilang bahwa one of the key features yang harus ada unique value proposition adalah multiplayer co-op misalnya. Dan tapi teman bilang bahwa teman-teman ada nih kayaknya programmer yang bisa bikin multiplayer, tapi teman-teman nggak ngerti masalah server-serverannya, how to scale the server, how to install the server globally, gimana mirroringnya, sharing database-nya, it's something yang kita bisa help. Jadi pasti case by case basis, dan justru harapannya kita tadi ini kan Skylab balik lagi effort membangun si International Space Station-nya bareng-bareng ya. Jadi hopefully kita punya knowledge dengan teman-teman punya knowledge, kita bisa sinergi untuk bangun game yang lebih besar lagi dari apa yang kita bisa lakukan kalau kita kerjain masing-masing. Generally gitu, jadi jawabannya bisa.
Oke, kalau gitu ada tambahan dari Kak Igor?
No, that pretty much covers everything, basically, yeah.
Alright, kalau gitu ada next question lagi nih dari M. Fatih. Any change for students or anyone not from a company to submit or join Agate Skylab as well?
I think I can just jump in here. I think to Arif's point, there's already a lot of other programs within the industry that accommodate other scales, right? I think it just depends on your pitch. If your pitch is, I can't do this at $15,000, I need this, and these are the qualifications that I bring to the table, and these are the steps that I know can be taken to achieve this, then we'd like to hear it. But I think it's best to consider the other options in the ecosystem first, right? They're there for a reason. So it's a very much stepping stone for every one of us here to go through. Gitu.
Oke, dari Kak Arif ada tambahan?
Setuju.
Oke. Kalau gitu lanjut ke ini pertanyaan terakhir ya yang akan aku bacakan, yaitu dari Ardi di Langan Studio. Katanya untuk demo yang disertakan dalam pitch dari Skylab, ekspektasinya demonya sudah sampai tahap mana?
It really depends on the idea ya. It depends. Contoh apa yang kita contoh ide mungkin kalau it's a more like plus one idea. Jadi misalnya plus one idea itu kayak udah ada gameplay yang lumayan proven, teman-teman ngambil beberapa elemennya dan teman-teman mau tambahin sesuatu. For this kind of idea kita mungkin lebih prefer teman-teman udah bisa bikin demo yang full gameplay. Mungkin kayak single very short gameplaynya bisa dimainkan dan lumayan polish. Kita mau yang kayak gitu karena it's a plus one idea. Tapi for a crazy big idea misalnya teman bilang, I have a game yang mainnya itu pakai kamera HP dan pakai image recognition teknologi AI di mana kita bisa tukeran wajah. Gue sama Igor bisa tukeran wajah. I don't know what the crazy idea is. Its technical demo will be fine. Jadi it really depends on the scale and then the craziness of the idea. Tapi most of the time probably kita prefer yang full gameplay punya demo.
Oke, dari Kak Igor ada
mungkin
tambahan?
Yeah, I think I'd like to give one big piece of advice that I learned in my time in advertising. When you pitch something, try to preempt every single question before they're asked, and make people ask the questions that they didn't know to ask, because then you control the narrative, right? So what that means is, if you think, okay, this vertical slice is more than enough, and then you go in there and Arif and I start asking questions, you're like, fuck, I don't know how to answer that, you're screwed. But if you go in and you know exactly what to sell, then I think you're in good shape. I think that should be your key benchmark, right? Have I thought of everything? Like specifically, like what Arif's gonna ask, right? From project management and financial side, like, is this product gonna survive? Does it have a market? Have you done your research in every one of these things? That's what I want to see, because only then can we actually know where to scale it. Gitu.
Oke. Kalau gitu ternyata ada pertanyaan terakhir nih. Ada satu lagi deh aku bacain ya. Ada dari Steve Dream Studio. Katanya, apakah games async or fake multiplayer gitu, apakah termasuk atau enggak ya? Dari siapa?
Arif dulu.
Oke.
Oke, gue jawabnya singkat. If you could make it sync, why you make it async? Udah, gue jawabnya salah. Gue tahu dia bakal jawab gitu. Ya, jadi mungkin elaborate ya. Jadi if you have, jadi kan pertanyaannya kenapa bikinnya asing? Kalau if you have the technology to make it sync, there have to be a very justifiable business or product reason to ensure that. Kalau enggak, mendingan full sync dong. Karena kalau sync saya bisa main sambil Discordan, sambil ngobrol. Jadi it's always way better to make it sync. Kalau enggak, jadi sebenarnya kita lebih ngedesain streamline single player game sebenarnya, not a collaborative space, karena nggak ada interaksi.
Oke, kalau gitu semoga menjawab untuk Steve. Nah, karena juga waktunya nih ternyata sudah habis ya, tidak terasa sekali. Kalau gitu sekali lagi terima kasih kepada semua rekan-rekan Game Dev Studio ataupun media yang sudah hadir dari awal sampai dengan penghujung acara ini. Kalau gitu semoga dengan adanya Agate Skylab Fund ini, industri game development Indonesia bisa terus melaju lagi nanti sampai dengan ke bulan. Seperti itu. Oke deh, kalau misalnya jika ingin tahu lebih lanjut lagi nih, atau misalnya submisi terkait pendanaan Agate Skylab, itu bisa langsung saja mengunjungi agate.id/skylab. Mungkin bisa dibantu juga untuk dituliskan di kolom chat ya. Dan juga mungkin kalau misalnya masih ada dari teman-teman game dev ataupun media masih ada pertanyaan nih yang belum sempat diajukan di sesi ini, bisa langsung aja menghubungi tim PR kami di pr@agate.id. Oke, nah karena kita secara virtual nih, sebelum kita akhiri konferensi persnya, aku pengen minta tolong untuk foto bersama dulu. Mungkin teman-teman yang belum on cam, bisa on cam silahkan. sebelum kita akhiri sesinya, mungkin bisa nanti juga dibantu oleh Kak Raka dan Kak Dinda ya untuk dokumentasi. Oke, teman-teman yang belum on cam silahkan untuk di on cam kan terlebih dahulu. Kita berfoto bersama.
Ya, teman-teman yang belum on kan?
Oke, sepertinya
Ada
masih
yang lagi
banyak yang
ambil
belum
baju.
ya. Iya, ada yang lagi ambil baju.
Kalau mau nyisir dulu boleh.
Ada yang nggak punya webcam ya, ya udah gak apa-apa kalau gitu. Oke, udah
Ini udah
on
banyak
cam
ya.
semua kah?
Siap-siap ya.
Oke, boleh dihitung dari Kak Raka kalau gitu.
Ya. 1, 2, 3. Thank you dulu.
Oke.
Ke next slide dulu. Karena ada 4 layar. Tapi nggak semuanya pakai kamera. Udah, siap. Yang kedua ya. 1, 2, 3. Oke. Yang lain kayaknya belum bisa di on cam. Jadi nggak apa-apa.
Udah semua berarti ya, Kak?
Sudah.
Oke deh, thank you. Kalau gitu, sekali lagi terima kasih. Oke,
Mau nitip mungkin mumpung masih ada waktu 5 menit terakhir, berhubung Pak Hari masih ada bareng kita sampai akhir, mungkin bisa minta beliau kasih sedikit petuah kali ya. Apa yang harus kita kejar 10 tahun ke depan ini.
Oke, Pak Hari, silakan.
Ya, terima kasih. Tadi saya mendengar semua dan jujur kalau yang teknikal saya nggak ngerti. Tapi benar ya saya, jadi tadi diskusinya mengenai mana segmen market yang mau kita fokus ya. Benar tadi Igor juga cerita bahwa kalau salah milih nggak akan scale up itu industri kita. Jadi we have to mikir. Jadi saya rasa dalam waktu dekat Arif dan teman-teman coba kita duduk untuk membuat roadmap. Nah, segmen market mana yang tipe apa yang kita dalam waktu dekat bisa lompat gitu ya. Nah, tadi beberapa saya pelajari ada beberapa kombinasi ya. Dan di presentasinya Igor juga ada saatnya kita co-optation berkolaborasi ya. Nah, kita ini kan masih besar, coba kita tekan masuk yang mana yang selama ini kita tidak pernah menggariskan dengan tegas yang mana kita mau masuk. Nah, saya minta nanti masukan dari teman-teman untuk bisa masuk itu, apakah kita fokus kepada prime game atau kepada multiplayer, dan mungkin kombinasinya, kalau akan kombinasi juga berapa persen. Nah, itu yang kita harus, sehingga kita tahu jalan yang mana. Jadi tidak bisa pertumbuhan organik tuh di lain kata, kalau kita diamkan jadi pertumbuhan kumuh gitu ya. Jadi kita harus ngedesainnya semacam kita membuat tata kota, kita semua desain jalannya dengan baik. Tapi at the end nanti kalau kita sudah bisa buat roadmap-nya, dan saya harapin dalam waktu dekat, penting habis itu adalah bekerja keras untuk menyelesaikan itu. There is nothing to work hard to finish, but work hard akan tidak berguna jika arahnya salah. So the first thing kita have to decide where the direction would be. If the direction kita sepakati bersama, then work hard and fast to get there ya. Jadi jangan sampai kita salah kerja keras ke arah yang salah. So, mari kita kerjakan bersama. Dan thank you very much. Saya rasa banyak jago-jagonya di sini. Tapi mari kita bekerja sama untuk bisa mengkristalkan jalan ini untuk kita masuk ke tier di atas kita. And finally in 10 years we'll be landed in moon, kata Pak Arif. Terima kasih. Sukses untuk semua.
Oke,
Thank you,
Pak Hari. Kalau gitu artinya demikianlah berakhir juga ya untuk konferensi pers Agate Skylab Fund pada hari ini. Mohon maaf juga jika tadi terdapat salah kata ataupun kekurangan dalam acara ini. Sampai bertemu di acara berikutnya. Thank you so much teman-teman. Bye-bye.